Welcome back. Today we are going to rehabilitate some 80-plus-year-old brass. Now I have some that's probably only 50 years old, but the majority of this is more than 80 years old. If you saw a previous video, you'll see that a good friend of mine, and we believe we may have some familial connections, Charlie Brass Stuffer, also Charles Irby, gave me a super Giftion. That was my previous video. You can see all the things he gave me. One of the things he gave me was a bucket full of 30-06 brass. This brass ranged from, the oldest I found was 1927. That's old. I don't care who you are, that's old. That was from Frankfurt Arsenal. It's marked FA. So, not knowing the condition of the brass, I said, yeah, I can use 30-06, but let's make sure we have a chance of survival. So, I am doing the full Monty on these brass. These were tarnished. They'd been sitting around for Lord only knows how long. So I dry tumbled. Some people are totally against dry tumbling, but I wanted to remove most of this tarnish. Then I used my universal decapping die because I didn't want to work the brass at that point. And I knocked the primers out. Some of the primers I couldn't get out. They're military brass, so they've got a really good crimp. I'm going to continue working on some of those. But I separated everything. I segregated it. The majority of what I have is FA stamped 35. It's Frankfurt Arsenal. Come from just outside of Philadelphia. This has been a real learning experience for me. It's been a piece of history, and it's been really interesting for me. But I dry tumbled. I knocked the primers out. Then, after having it all segregated into batches, FA35, I've got some stuff that's marked BN40. I don't know. We've tried to locate the origin of the head stamp, but there were certain times in our history that enemies of the country didn't want us to, we didn't want the enemies of our country to know the origin of the brass, so they were marked with one-off type head stamps. So we think that's what the BN40 is, but if it's a 40, then that would have been made in 1940. I've got a small amount of commercial brass, mainly Winchester. This is civilian brass, so it's different than the military. Again, you want to keep that segregated. I've got some Lake City brass from 1963. Unfortunately, people really covet Lake City brass, and we believe that the previous owner of this brass did not anneal the brass. So I found an unfortunate amount of split necks on those after I dry tumbled them and we could get the tarnish off. But after segregating, I wet tumbled with BBs. I don't use steel pins. I use BBs because I'm cheap. That's why it's 2A on a budget. It does work with large primer pocket brass because the BBs don't get stuck in the primer pockets. If you use BBs when you wet tumble with small primer pockets, you're going to find that the BBs are just the right size to stick in the primer pockets. So I'm still trying to find a different method for that. But after doing that, I cleaned the primer pockets out. I annealed the brass using a cheap method with just a socket, a long extension, and my propane torch. You have to really be careful. You don't want to over anneal it That will take all of the stiffness out of it, and you could have more problems than you want. So you got to be really careful. You got to watch your flame pattern. You got to watch your discoloration. After annealing, I wet tumbled again, and now I'm working the brass. After annealing, now I can work it. I don't want to work the brass before it's annealed. It's brittle. Remember, this stuff is older than 80 years old on the majority of it. Even the I guess it'd be 79 years old if it's 40, since we're in 2019. Any brass that's more than probably 15 to 20 years old that you're working, you really want to make sure that you anneal it, because brass over a period of time will get brittle just from age. It's not from overworking or anything else. If you shoot a lot of brass, shoot it a long time, repeatedly, then you really want to anneal again. I've got some 6.5 Grendel brass that I'm going to be annealing. It's been fired 4 times, and now that it's been fired that many times, it's going to start hardening up. I don't want to lose any of that brass, because my 6.5 Grendel brass is hard to come by. But I'm going to bring you through the process of what I'm doing, and I hope you find this interesting. This is some of my Lake City brass. In fact, as I'm looking at it, I'm finding another split neck. This is after I dry tumble it. It's got kind of a low sheen, and I don't know if you can see this, but the neck is definitely split in 2 places. Again, this was brass that was overworked and never annealed, and that's what happens with brass. There's still some discoloration on these cases, but I'm not too worried about it. I've already knocked the primers out. This is going to eventually be good brass. After I wet tumble it, I anneal it, and this is what it looks like after annealing. And again, if you've got any case splits, and I did find some when I was annealing this. This is my Frankfurt Arsenal 35 brass. I'm working in that batch right now. After I do all of the FA 35s, then I'll move on to another batch, and I'll continue doing it. But you can see these are discolored, and so what I do after I've annealed all of these is then I wet tumble them again, and then I put them in my little, I call it my Easy Bake oven. It's my $20 Walmart oven. So I wet tumble again. They come out looking like this. It takes a lot of that annealing discoloration off. If you look really close, you can still see just slight discoloration. So I can at least know that these have been annealed, and now I can start working them. My bench is a total disaster area if you look at it, but it's actually controlled chaos. I've got several simultaneous things going on at a time. I've got my dry tumbled but decapped commercial brass. I've got my FA 35s that have been dry tumbled, cleaned, decapped, cleaned, annealed, cleaned again. I've got some of my other stuff. This is my BM40. It's just been dry tumbled. It hasn't been wet tumbled yet. It has been decapped. All of my brass have been decapped. So what I'm doing now, and I'll have pictures of all this older brass in here and some of the steps that I'm doing. What I'm doing now is I'm using my flash hole uniforming tool, because we don't know what the condition is on this, and I'm running it around. I can hold it to the light, and I can see if there's any abnormalities or any more splits. I'm looking the whole case over as I twist this around. I just give a little quick twist here in the primer pocket flash hole just to make sure there's no burrs there. Then I'm going to chuck this into my Lee Easy Trim. This will guarantee my case length is proper, because again, this is unknown brass. Run that around really quick. Looks like it's a good length. Use my chamfering tool. because we don't want to work the brass any more than we have to. We don't want to stretch it. Even though it's been annealed, it's still old, and you try and respect that age. Outside. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I use a little bit of my Hornady Unique case lube, put a little bit on here. Then I'm going to run this up into my full length after I measure it. Sorry, I'm trying to get ahead of myself. Okay, zero this. This is my Hornady headspace comparator. Got that zeroed. I'm just comparing to see how far I'm setting back the shoulders. I could compare every one of my other cases that I've run through. I could compare all these cases that I haven't run through yet. I'm going to get different readings between those and these. So every one of these is just a little bit different. But running them up into my full length sizing die, then I can uniform them. So run that up in there. Then I'm going to give this about a half a turn. This will ensure any run out that may be in the case. Again, these are unknown quantities. We don't know how they've been treated. Wipe these off a little bit, get that case lube off. Then I can run this up into my comparator again. And that looks like it ran back about 1.5. I wanted to go 2 thousandths. 1.5 will work. The less you have to work your brass, the better. Especially the solder brass. Even though it's been annealed, I still don't want to work it any more than I have to. This is an old warhorse, and I want to respect it, and I want to continue using it. After I've set this shoulder back, now I know it'll chamber in my rifle. I've compared it to some Fireform brass that I had for my 30-06, and that's how I set my sizing die. And all I had to do is set these back 2 to 3 thousandths the most. Some come out 1.5 thousandths like this one, but that's where my sizing die is set, so we're good to go. On this batch here, I'll be annealing those. You can see some of the discoloration on these cases, even after dry tumbling and one wet tumbling. But once I run these through the wet tumbler again after I anneal them, they'll come out a lot less discolored. Also, since these are this is military brass and it's unknown condition, and that's why I'm doing all of the work that I'm doing, all the extra work. I wasn't sure if I needed to swage the primer pockets, so on these that I haven't done anything yet, I put a primer in just to see if it's good. It is. I'll knock that primer out in a little while. Also, after the initial cleaning, like I said, I dry tumbled them. They come out like this. I knocked the primers out using my universal decapping die. And then I wet tumbled them, but I still have a lot of corrosion and discoloration in the primer pockets. So I'm taking my primer cleaning tool. You see it took a lot of that out, and I'm just putting a little chamfer on the edge of the primer pocket. And I do that before I anneal them. That way that step is done. Now I'm going to try to anneal these cases. I don't have an annealing machine. I wish I did, but I don't, and I don't have the money to buy one. I don't have the time to build one. There are plenty of people out there that have built their own, and they seem to work well, but I don't have that kind of time or money. So I'm doing it the old-fashioned way, using I don't know how long this extension is, long extension, and a 9/16 deep socket. The deep socket will help keep the heat from getting down around the case. You only want to get the first little bit past the neck, past the shoulder, excuse me. So that's what I'm trying to do here. All I really need to do is make sure that I can get this brass able to work again, because after 84 years, this brass, I am sure, is completely brittle, as evidenced by all of the split necks that I got. So I will continue to anneal these, and I'll be right back. Here's my tin of annealed brass, slightly discolored. Is it annealed enough? Don't know. Is annealed too much? Don't know. I don't have any Templac, the temperature paint, to put on here. Maybe one of these days I'll be able to find some. When I only have one day off, it's really hard to go and source parts and materials that I need. People ask me, why are you not out shooting today? Beautiful sunny sky, but I'm receiving wind warnings. As many of you know from watching my videos, out on the West Desert we get some pretty severe winds. Right now, here in town, 40 miles away from my shooting area, we're getting 35 to 55 mile an hour winds right now. So I decided not to waste ammunition trying to hit a target when the wind's gusting and blowing and shifting. It gets pretty frustrating to try and do any accuracy testing when the wind's blowing your bullets all over the place. And you may say, oh, it's maybe only going to drift a half an inch, but if you've got a half minute of angle group going, the wind comes up, kicks it, now you got a 1 minute of angle, that little extra half inch. So hopefully this video has showed you that I'm trying to revive some old brass. We'll see how it works when I take it out to the range and shoot it. Now I wanted to say one other word. The Reloaders Network. I belong to the Reloaders Network, and I'm very proud of the fact. I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but I have met some really incredible people on the Reloaders Network, and because of those relationships, I have my super gifty on, just because I've met some very generous, giving, caring people. I'm learning so much. Even though I've known a lot of things my whole life, I'm still learning a lot. We are a very giving community, and the knowledge that you can gain for casting, reloading, shooting. We've got one guy, Eagle Eye Shooting. I call him the professor. He is trying things out of the box, and some things work, some things don't, but he goes against convention. Charlie Brass Stuffer, Charles Irby, like I mentioned, that's where I got most of this, where I got this brass from. A bunch of lead, a bunch of primers, just a super nice guy. But he is a wealth of information, as is James Pollard, as is Harm, as is Joe Leadslinger, Lone Warrior, or Wanderer. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but we share the information that we've gained over the years so that as a community we can grow as one. And I know I'm harping on this, but I really urge everybody, if you haven't seen the Reloaders Network, please go over there. We have a social site that's called Slack. Slack is used in several different businesses and stuff, but this Slack channel is devoted just to the Reloaders Network and Headspace. We are constantly sharing information, greetings, everything. It's just such a great place to hang out, and I probably spend most of my social time on Slack, and we post videos up on the Reloaders Network. So please, if you haven't had the opportunity to go do this, go over there and check it out. And I'll leave the link in my description. Go check it out, and hopefully when I get the opportunity to get this brass loaded up and get out to the range, we'll find out if I've done my job and I've saved this 84-year-old brass and some of the other as I work on it, and see if we can put this back to use. If you think about the historical value of this brass, think of where the world was in 1935 through 1940. I think the best military brass I've got, well, I've got some, it goes to 43, but I've got some St. Louis brass SL 56 and 57. And again, we were in the Cold War, so as our arms industry was making this brass, they were preparing to use it in anger. So the historical value of all this is just, it's been really touching for me, knowing that people slaved away well, not slave, that's the wrong word, that people toiled away to make this brass for our nation's defense, to keep the world free. And I hope you see the same thing. Thank you.